Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Casella. I am with the Doorway to College Foundation. Thank you for joining us for our inaugural Educators in Unison virtual forum this afternoon. Today, we will be discussing the ACT and SAT in today's college admissions environment, specifically as it pertains to the class of 2021 and beyond. Today, we will have panelists and attendees in our webinar. As an attendee, we encourage you to use the Q&A functionality to interact with us, as well as the chat functionality to interact with us. We will be engaging in conversation throughout the session. While we do have a few questions and topics that we know that we would like to hit, we encourage you to dialogue as much as you feel comfortable. We will also be recording today's session for those who might be interested in reviewing what we have talked about, as well as those who might want to share. Joining me today is a panel of expert educators, and we will go ahead and start out with my colleague, Adam Smith.
Allie, hello everybody. Great to have you all here. My name is Adam Smith. I'm the Director of Community Partnerships and Educational Access for Doorway to College Foundation. As people come in, if you don't mind throwing in the chat where you're coming from, it's great to know where people currently are in the space. And I also wanted to take a second and just kind of acknowledge all of the challenges that our people are going through. I know that hopefully this can be a safe space for you to express any concerns or stresses that you have. All of us being educators related to our students, we tend to put their needs before everyone's, but in this time in particular, when we're dealing with a global pandemic and we're dealing with systemic racism and always, it's just every day there's something. If you're like me, you try to, you're drawn to social media, but then also try to stay off it because it at times just draws you in. So we wanted to honor that space. We wanted to give you the space to express any concerns or feelings, and also know this is about you and us pouring into you so that you can in turn do the same for your students. We're gonna quickly, so it's great to have y'all here. I see Tidewater in Virginia. I see Southeast Oklahoma, U of L, Go Cards, that crew. Great to have y'all here. U of I, excited to have everyone. As you all have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We really appreciate that. But I also wanted to, different from some of our other forums, go through a couple slides, then we'll introduce our panel. But I want to make sure everybody is coming from the same space, since we're all over the country, and understanding ACT and SAT and some historical stuff. So most of you know this, but these are some of the uses that institutions use beyond admission. So we're hearing a lot about going to ACT or SAT optional for admission, especially for the class of 2021 for fall. So that is admission decisions going to an ACT or SAT optional, but it's also used to get into competitive majors, things like engineering, obviously, architecture, some really high-level competitive majors and colleges within the institution, as well as for institutional scholarships. So those, what we call those big coupons that the institution gives based on class rank, GPA overall in certain courses, an ACT or SAT score, whether that's composite or super score. Institutions also use the ACT and SAT subscores, and some also offer AccuPlacer or other things for placement in programs, especially in mathematics. So looking at the national averages, and I know these change a little bit. So looking at the national averages on the ACT, the national average is just over 21. So we'll just say 20 or just over 20. So 20 and a half-ish, and right around a 1060 on the SAT. Those averages change as they are compared to some of our URM students. So our Black students average right now is about a 16.7 on the ACT. My mind thinks ACT more than SAT sometimes. And for our Latinx students, it's right around the same at a 17.1. So in addition to these benchmarks, there are also states. So if you're not in one of these states, our colleague in Iowa and Allie were talking about this, there are about 30 states in the country that ACT or SAT is the mandatory test that's given in the spring of junior year. The first state, I believe, that did that was Illinois. They started with ACT as part of the Prairie State exam given in about 2000-ish. All of the juniors in their high school during the school day, Illinois, interestingly, has switched from ACT to SAT. So there's about 30 states that every student in the state takes one or both tests in their high school during spring of the junior year. So in part, this response in going optional was because of the suspension in education per person or face-to-face that students had in the spring because of COVID-19, and they weren't able to take it in their school. So different from an old guy like me who signed up to take the ACT and then got up one Saturday morning and went to my local high school or a community college or a university to take it. These students take it at school during the school day, every single student. So there's some benchmarks in each one of those areas, and I'm not going to read them all, but there are some predictability as it relates to the ACT and predictability that if you get 50% of the students who achieve these benchmarks get a B or greater in the corresponding course. Same thing with 75% on the C level. Same thing in particular with the benchmark in math on the SAT, that if you meet that benchmark of a 530, there's a 75% chance that you're going to perform at a C level or greater in stats, pre-calc, and calc when you go on to college and university. So they've provided some of that tracking data. So one of the things I wanted to also get out is, and this is the last one, is I wanted to get out some information about placement. So college algebra, and I know every school is a little different, but for college algebra, if you have an ACT math composite score of a 22, that would put you in college algebra, about a 540 in the SAT. Pre-calc, that goes to about a 24, and Avis will correct me because he's the math guy. SAT, a 580, and calculus, it's about a 27. So these scores are important because it decreases time to degree, it increases the ability for a student to access competitive majors where they can earn the most money as they graduate, and it diminishes the number of remedial courses that students take. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panel. Teresa, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, my name's Teresa Radomski-Bamba. I'm the Assistant Director in the University Honors Program at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio.
Hey, Teresa. Avis?
All right. Avis Brown, Director for the Office of Academic and Retention Support at the University of Akron. In Akron, Ohio, sorry.
Thank you, Avis. Donna?
Hi, Donna Lowen. I'm coordinator of the College Access Network in Dubuque, Iowa. And I understand there's a fellow Iowan here. I didn't meet you yet. I should add, that's what I've been doing for the last about year and a half. And prior to that, I have experience on the faculty of a private liberal arts college in the Midwest, and but most of my professional life was spent as an elementary teacher and principal.
Yes. Avora?
Hi, everyone. My name is Evora Baker, and I am the Assistant Director of the Shepherd University Upward Bound program here in West Virginia. I've been with TRIO for more than 14 years now, and Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which is where the institution is located, is right in between Virginia and Pennsylvania, and Maryland.
Awesome. So kind of Frederick, Maryland-ish, right, Evora? Ish. Erin, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your current role and then some of the past roles you've held, because I'm going to ask you a question that hits some of those things.
Sure. I'm Erin Gabriel, and I am in West Des Moines, Iowa. I am the college career coordinator for Dowling Catholic High School, but I also serve as the ACT, SAT site supervisor for my high school in the surrounding metro area. And previous to that, because I've been at Dowling for 6 years, I was in college admissions for 9 years at a selective university.
So Erin, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing? So we kind of talked a little bit about that offline, some of the challenges and the barriers this test optional world has created for your students and their families, because Dowling Catholic is a top tier high school, very good high school, right? So how has that played out with your students? And then how do you see that playing out with some of the students you may have targeted in admissions who are URM students or Pell eligible students?
Sure. At my high school, so I have my class of 2021 is 330 seniors, and only 125 of them previously had an ACT before COVID, had an ACT score, because we have hosted ACT. We were set to do a district whole class opportunity at the very end of March, and we were only able and we weren't able to do it because of COVID. And so our students then had the April ACT canceled. They had the June ACT canceled, and we are set to host in July, but I'm not sure, we don't know how that's going to play out over the next couple weeks. And then the test will start in the fall, but because so many students don't have a test score right now, they're nervous for college admission. And college admissions are, a lot of schools are going test optional, and which has been great for the last couple of, really the last 2 months have really expedited that process for colleges and universities. But I have students that are worried about taking the ACT or SAT, because our 3 state schools in the state of Iowa require an ACT score for admission. And it's part of the state code that an ACT score is part of the process. And so we can't change that overnight. I have students that are student athletes, and currently the NCAA requires an ACT score or SAT score. And so even if a student went to a test optional university, they may still have to have a test score for the NCAA. I have students that are worried about those top tier majors, and so they want to be able to be competitive because they can't, they may not be test optional. And I have students that, I have a student that I've worked with this week because I've been doing a read aloud accommodation for her ACT, and she has 2 previous test scores, but she's not happy with them. And she's afraid that that will be, I guess, poorly reflective of her overall academic ability and her passion and interest. And so she's trying to take it again for the 3rd time. And so she's super worried about just being able to go to college next year. And then when I was at, on the university side, we were not test optional, because again, that's about 6 years ago. And so we had students that needed test scores, but then we would unfortunately deny students because their test score wasn't where we could be, but yet they would have been a great fit for our institution.
Right. So it's really a mixed bag. And Allie, you didn't know I was going to call on you, but you and I were talking about this. You, first generation, first in your family, TRIO eligible, just like me. What was the first thing that came to mind when you heard, okay, this is going to be test optional? What would Allie Casella have done if she was class of 2021, right? And how could this have maybe negatively impacted you differently than maybe some other students?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think to some extent I may have been an anomaly in the fact that I was like a heavy researcher, and I felt like I navigated the admissions process a little bit differently than a lot of first generation college students. But be that as it may, Even if I had read something to the effect that said test optionality, you don't have to take the test, I might have looked into it and might have found some benefit that said on paper, you should still maybe consider taking this test. And I might have read that and I might have taken that information in and thought to myself, okay, maybe I'll take the test. But I'll tell you what, that $36 was coming out of my pocket. And I did pay to take the ACT myself. And I promise you, I might have considered not taking it. As I did, I only took it the one time because of finances. I didn't have any test preparation. I didn't do anything beyond that $36 investment. And if I could have gotten out of paying that $36, I might have taken that route for sure.
Right, because you were saying your score was good enough, right? So the score you got, it was similar to mine. I took it Saturday, the day after a high school football game, got good enough score to qualify, got a good enough score to go to Drake University in Des Moines, and was just like, shoot, I'm not going to take that thing again. I'm not going to do anything I don't have to do, right? Especially because I'm paying for it. Right, and so that could be different. Teresa, can you talk a little bit about how the honors program, because your lens is a little bit different, it's the honors program at Miami. Can you talk a little bit about how you all are using ACT, SAT, and has that changed for 2021? And has that maybe has any barriers been created unintended?
So Miami has announced that they are not going to be utilizing the ACT or SAT for admissions for fall 2021, and that will include honors program admissions. They have told us in the past that the entire admission process is looking at high school GPA, the strength of high school curriculum, standardized tests, and then there's also the essay component and any other additional factors that are included on a student's application. So they're, according to our admissions office, they're just dropping that data point out of the overall calculation. That means that all of the other factors are going to have greater weight. And I see in particular strength of curriculum being a thing that carries additional weight. GPA is a tricky thing to decide. One of the conversations we have a lot as we're talking to prospective students who are interested in the honors program is they'll say, oh, well, my high school doesn't weight GPA, or my high school doesn't have very many weighted classes, so my GPA doesn't look as good. What does that mean for me? Can I still get into honors? And we'll contact the Office of Admission, make sure that that's on their radar, make sure that they're considering that student in light of their high school not providing, as many AP classes, as many dual enrollment options, and so that student has a fair shot when they're being compared to other students who may have a weighted GPA, I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have students who have a 4.2 or 4.3 or sometimes higher high school GPA, in addition to a very strong ACT or SAT score. And I know that from an honors program perspective, we are concerned that the students, the same factors that tend to impact ACT or SAT score also often are reflected in the rigor of a high school curriculum. So I don't know the extent to which that's going to help. We don't know what that's going to look like entirely yet, but that is a big concern, that it will place greater emphasis on rigor, supposed rigor of curriculum, and then continue to disadvantage students who aren't able to attend high schools that have highly rigorous curricula. So that's one of the concerns that we have going into it. And as an honors program, it is imperative to us that we ensure that the diversity of our program, that the number of first generation students, low income students, non-white students, that number is as high as is reasonably possible. We know that there are a lot of barriers to attending Miami overall as a residential institution, as being, we're not in the middle of a city. So we know that there are a lot of other barriers, particularly associated with cost. But we want to make sure that the students who want to come to Miami and are interested in the honors program are getting a fair evaluation in light of their ability as a student, and not being dismissed, or not dismissed, but not being overlooked because they aren't attending a high school that has, all of the AP options, and instead has maybe 1 or 2 or 3, and maybe those aren't the ones that are an appropriate course choice for that particular student. AP biology doesn't help a student who wants to be an English major and doesn't have an interest in a STEM field, and the other way around.
That's really good. That's really good. So Avis, I know your internet's a little crazy with some weather stuff there in Northeast Ohio, always weather stuff in Northeast Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about how you at Akron use test scores? Because I know you're awarding a lot of scholarship dollars to students, some based on tests, some not. But how do you see that correlation? Are you using test scores, and how do you see the correlation between test score and overall student success? Because I think one of the challenges is that we think about getting students to college, right? That was like the panacea. Well, I'm going to get you in. But one of the biggest things that our country is facing right now is not just student loan debt, but this huge percentage of people that have student loan debt and no degree, right? And that tends to be people who are low income, minority, first generation, TRIO eligible type students. So how are you seeing some of the test score stuff play out, and how do you use it at Akron?
Hopefully my connection stays good. I think I look at test scores, or my area definitely looks at it. It's kind of a mixed bag. I guess let me start with saying that it worries me about dropping the scores. In one sense, it's great because it allows more access for students, especially students of color, low income, students who aren't great test takers as well. So it creates an opportunity and a pathway for students to have that access. But at the same time, it's a setup for students, depending on what major they want. Especially at Akron, we're more of a STEM institution, right? Engineering, most of the students in our scholarship program, our STEM scholarship program are engineering majors, so that's 70%. And so we get so many students that come in wanting to be engineers, not understanding what it takes, but come with this perceived notion that they're prepared, that they're ready. In high school, I took pre-calc in high school, I took the AP test, or I'm waiting on my AP scores, thinking they're going to get a 4 or 5. I already know, after talking to some students, I'm like, it's probably not going to be a 4 or 5. 5 is really rare. Actually ended up getting a student last year that had a 5, so I was excited about that, because you hardly ever get those. I think dropping the scores will give students and families a false sense of security. Also giving students a false sense of confidence of being prepared for the institutions they get into, because now you'll be admitted into an institution that before would have said no. And so it's fair for the student to get the chance, but it's not fair because they don't know what they're really walking into. I think the same thing with that is because schools are still going to look at those scores and admit students on a different note and maybe not let them know. We actually did that. We have a new program that we're working with students who initially were admitted into the university but did not meet all of the scores to say yes automatically, but they weren't told no. So they go through a holistic review, and so you're still admitted, all right? Or other institutions have conditionally admitted students. And so students are coming in, and our setup with advising, it's right in that college. So I come in thinking I'm a bio major or a nursing major or engineering major, when technically I'm not, because my scores don't have me there yet. And my scores will show, if I'm below certain numbers, as you were showing earlier in the PowerPoint, that you won't be able to take classes for your particular class. So if you can't take the classes going into your major, you're starting off in developmental coursework, or some classes, but depending on the major, add up to be developmental. work. So if that's where you're starting at, you have another year or two added to your for school to even get to that point. And if you're low income, first generation, you got 12 months with Pell. Say you're a full Pell student, you got 12 months. You have 8 semesters. I'm sorry, with Pell. So you have that amount of time, and so you're getting through that particular situation, and you're starting behind the score. You're starting behind. So what I do is look at those scores, and we look to see who are, when we do our summer bridge program, first thing we look at is anybody 26 or lower. Usually I try to stay between 17 and 26 on the math side, because 17 on the math side shows there's a lot of work that needs to be done. 26 says that you're pretty good and probably think you're better than what you may be. So let's make sure that your skills are ready, because what will happen is you come into a university straight in the calc. They're throwing you in the calc, chemistry, bio, and all kind of stuff for your first year. You're not ready for that coursework. So I need to make sure you're ready for the work, and then also that we can get you prepared for the load that's coming with you on top of that. So I think that's the challenge with it. And the way I look at those scores is where they're beginning, what it means, and how successful that student can be. So it's really difficult because a lot of people get the scores, don't truly know how to translate it for students and translate it for all students, right? So each student is different, but understanding that dynamic. Teresa was talking about getting students in and what those scores mean and being in honors, different things like that. But they have a lot of challenges that come with it. We can pinpoint some of those things once you know how. I'm not saying it's a trade everybody has and can do well, but it can be dangerous for institutions and to students if we don't do it correctly. But if you do it correctly and do understand what those numbers mean, and we prepare students and families, I think it could be a great benefit for students, especially with having those scores being lowered. But they need to know that they're still important, and the scores matter, because the scores will make sure you can graduate.
So Avis, tell everyone, because everybody on the Zoom right now may not know, how much money did you award in scholarships last year to students?
Last year, total about 2.3 million. That was just from the state granted scholarship. Internally, we had another program where internally students are getting scholarships from the university as well, and that adds up to a couple $100 million as well. So
100,000.
Yeah, I said million. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And you don't, and what you're, because it's interesting, because you're the only one on the call with a mathematics degree, right? And so you aren't even looking at composites. You're looking at math subscore. That's it. You're not looking at, you don't care if the composite is a 29. If the math subscore is not where you need it to be, you're like, okay, the predictability of their success, not getting in, their success in engineering or pre-med or whatever it might be, nursing, right? You're saying, so you're really looking at, you're diving into that math subscore, where Teresa was saying they're looking at challenging curriculum, right? And knowing that some of our students, one of the challenges is our students that live in low-income high schools, urban high schools, rural high schools, they may take the toughest class their school has. It may be a 3.9, 4.2 kid. But the reality is we know, right, that isn't the same as a suburban high school where the curriculum may be more challenging, right? And so that's what Teresa's saying, is that we can get caught in that, because then all we're doing is rewarding privilege, if I might say, right? But what you're saying is you dig into that math subscore and not even look into the rest of it and give away $2.5 million.
Yeah, if I can get deeper, we try to and look at where they're from. The more we know about a student, the better predictability we can have. So yeah, if we can get those factors, the school they come from, the type of curriculum they're used to, if they had college courses while they were in high school, that helps. But that math score really tells a lot. And then taking that and then adding it to the other information pretty much gets us it gives us a pretty accurate account of what we're going to deal with students. We're hardly ever wrong about the prediction. I like to be wrong, but most of the time we usually get it pegged right, and it usually shows within the students' first 2 years, 2 to 3 years. It shows because it might be good for the first couple of classes, but that third, fourth class they get to, everything starts to fall apart.
Well, and the important thing for people to know, and you did mention this, so people who don't know this, a standard engineering program is 5 years, right? So if a student starts in Calculus 1, engineering with co-op is going to take 5 years, right, Avis-ish? But in what you said was, which was really interesting, is that a student total student has 12 semesters of Pell, right? Still 12. So if a student tests below or gets below a C in one of those math courses, the reality is, right, so that's why this placement in ACT, SAT sub-score is so important, because if you want to go into a competitive major, a major that you're going to walk out making $70,000, $80,000 a year, you know, and be able to pay off that student loan debt, you have to start in calculus, because if you're a C- guy like me, even if you bust your tail in calculus, you get a C-, you can't move on to Calc 2. And now C- and Pell don't go together, right? Especially in progressive curricula. So that's really important. Avor, can you talk a little bit, because you're in West Virginia, you're an SAT state, you also have mandates from the state on some state scholarship dollars, some state like promise dollars, right? So talk a little bit about some of the work you've done with your students and how potentially this could, or what you're doing to remediate your class of 2021 as far as their test scores, and what you're dealing with as far as challenges upcoming for your upward bound students.
Well, as far as West Virginia is concerned, it's interesting. We started administering the SAT the year that we got funding for our Upward Bound program here at Shepherd University. So I've been in this uphill climb, just trying to figure out what's going to work for our students. Of course, our partnership with Doorway to College has been instrumental. Right now, I'm not sure where things are. I had a student who contacted me earlier today. He's a senior who just graduated, and he called and Ms. Baker, can I retake the SAT? Do you know if there's going to be any tests soon? Because of where he placed. He'll be coming to Shepherd in the fall, and because of where he placed initially, he's only taken the test one time. And so I'm really, really weary about how we're helping these students. Prior to today's panel, I read this article by Abigail Hess, and she said that there are 3 components to why rich kids perform better on the SAT than poor kids. The first, of course, we know is cost. Okay, and if this pandemic hasn't shown us anything else, it showed us how inequality and economics mix so well together that we almost cripple a huge population in the United States. So the first was cost. On average, most students who take the SAT, whose parents earn under $20,000 a year, take the SAT one time or ACT one time. I've got students in my program, I've been pounding in their head for 3 years that they qualify for SAT and ACT waivers, and they still come to me and say, well, I didn't take it because I couldn't afford it. I was waiting for my mom to send me money. So cost. The next thing is academic support. And this was something really interesting and something that I didn't know. But in most of the wealthier schools, actually this one I did know, but extra time was one thing. And in most of the wealthier schools, students actually get extra time because of 405 designation. That's something that I learned. And then the academic support. Well, of course, as we know, wealth and money translates to what type of classes these students are taking. And some of my schools here in West Virginia, we have honors programs, and in some of the programs we don't. And I'm in the wealthier part of West Virginia. And so, and it's showing on the test. About 20% of students in West Virginia are meeting proficiency level on the math section and the language section of the SAT in the entire state of West Virginia. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Everything is up in limbo.
Yeah, it really does. I think we think of the challenges with scores, you know, and there was this whole, I'm an old guy, right? So there's this whole conversation about culturally biased and all of this about tests when I was taking the test. And I think the ACT and SAT have done a decent job of dealing with some of that. They haven't done, we can't deal with our society being culturally biased, right? And poverty bias, right? And we're not even talking about Aunt Becky buying her kids' way into college. We all know that have done things, that stuff happens. But we're talking about when my kids went to a suburban school in Ohio, they had an ACT prep class as part of their curriculum that they could take over a quarter to prep their kids for the test. They also had after school ACT strategy seminars that we're putting on. So it seems where the resources are needed, they don't go, right? And then it's challenging for students who are TRIO eligible to get the kind of help and the kind of prep and the kind of support that they need and encouragement, not only to take the test, but be prepared to take the test, right? It isn't just, you know, Avis and I are old football players, right? You have millions of dollars spent on guys just getting ready to run the 40-yard dash at the combine. And I don't want you to run the fastest. I want you to run your fastest, right? And that's really the goal. Donna, can you talk, because I think a lot of this has to do with messaging, right? And you have the whole College Access Network there in Dubuque. Can you talk a little bit about some of the messaging and the things that your partners are hearing and things that the schools are hearing, and what you're hearing as somebody who's in the work, right? You and I talked about this, what you're hearing about this test optional and what you see as some unintended positive consequences, and then maybe some unintended negative things.
Thank you, Adam. And Avis, I wanted to compliment you on your awesome broad coverage. I was on the May 28th panel. I wasn't on the panel. I was on the call when you spoke, and I've gone back to your comments a few times as I prepared for this. So in Dubuque, we are one of the 8 largest districts in the state of Iowa. So we're a school district of about 11,000-ish students. We have worked so hard through our partners in our College Access Network this past year, and the school district has agreed, I hope they'll stay the course, to enter into the junior year plan for every student in the district an opportunity to take the ACT test on a designated day in their junior year at the school at no cost, within the school day. It was a huge kudo to get them to agree to this. We of course, we're concerned in our network about increasing the number of first-gen and low-income and non-white students that have a post-secondary plan, who go to college. We saw the challenges of things like, financial transportation. Adam, you talked about getting up on a Saturday morning and driving to your high school. Some kids have to drive beyond their even outside the community for a specific test date that might work and doesn't interfere with their sports or their part-time job or their family needs or whatever. We really wanted this to happen because we want all kids to think about life after they graduate from high school and beyond. And so they've agreed to this. Students do get to choose, but we trust that with information and support and conversations with parents and teachers and counselor, that most of them will choose to take the ACT. That is more the test of choice in the state of Iowa. As a first-gen student myself, those many years ago, but I wasn't even college-bound until come end of my junior year, or whenever it is in my junior year, we took the PSAT. And my counselor had a look at that's not even my counselor, but someone on the counseling staff called me in and said, "Are you thinking about college?" That was the farthest thing from my mind, because I fit both the first gen and the low income category, and it was not in my family's plan. At any rate, what I share that is because taking a test like the ACT, our partners all see that as, you know, a door opener, creates options, opens up conversations about what students can do, what choices they have. It reveals perhaps some skills and some capacities that maybe weren't seen in the classroom. It also, if students indicate which colleges they may have some interest in, they're going to get information, hopefully be contacted, etc. So this was a big coup for us to get the district to agree to do this, to set aside the time to pay for it, etc. We certainly hope, I haven't had specific conversations about this over the last couple of months with some of our partners and with the school district. I certainly hope it's still in the plans for this coming school year, even if more and more schools are not accepting or requiring the ACT or SAT. It just is a, you know, it's a great bit of information to open up conversations with students and their parents. So you asked another something with that, Adam, and I didn't note it. So if there's something else you wanted me to comment on or come back to me later.
Yes, ma'am. I sure will, because I don't, you know, I have
Okay.
I don't remember. So, Teresa, can you talk a little bit? We talked about admission to Miami. We talked about admission to the honors program. Can you talk a little bit about scholarships? Ava's kind of hit that, but that's different because his office is awarding those scholarships. Can you talk a little bit about scholarships that are available at Miami and have student, you know, for the automatic qualifiers in the past, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, and if you've heard any rumblings about test scores being thrown out for those things too?
So like at many schools, the automatic scholarships are generally looking at standardized test score plus high school GPA. So that's you know, they have different tiers and different amounts that come with each of those tiers. With the shift away from test scores, the official announcement said that it would not impact scholarship eligibility. The details haven't been released yet, and it is still relatively early with all of the changes that came with the pandemic. One of the things that changed was pushing out our confirmation date. So it's only been a few weeks since they finished recruiting this year's class. And that's another thing that, you know, a difference between Miami and some other schools is we, you know, hold very strictly to that confirmation date, but there are a lot fewer students confirming into like through the later parts of the summer, as you might see it at other schools. So I know that right now the Office of Admission is shifting into class of 2025, but students admitted for fall 2021 really shifting toward recruiting those students really hard. I know they were looking at, working on that earlier, but that's become their primary focus now. And so I'm sure that those details will be released soon. All we know so far officially is that standardized tests aren't supposed to disadvantage students who choose not to submit their scores. But yeah, that's where we are so far on that news.
Yeah, and I haven't heard kind of my ear to the ground nationally. I don't think I've heard one school that is a typical state school or Miami, right? Say Miami State School, but say we're not considering test score for our big auto scholarships that students get based on these criteria. I've yet to hear that. I might be wrong. I haven't heard that. Erin, can you talk a little bit as being the test administration queen, right, there at your high school? Can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers you're seeing to testing in light of COVID-19 and some of the social distancing? And we heard a lot about ACT and SAT saying, well, we're going to figure out a way to administer these online and all these different things. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges people are facing and maybe some of the things that we might not even know about yet because these are still rising seniors?
Sure. We, as I said, I do try to host 6 ACT dates in an academic year, and then we host 6 SAT dates in an academic year, so that we would be open on 12 Saturdays for testing. But just that, it's a Saturday test, and students may have transportation issues. We have students who, for July 18th, because that date was limited in general, kind of across testing opportunities, I have students that are driving 90 minutes to go take the test at a different location because we filled up and the Des Moines metro schools filled up. And so they've reached further out to fill up those locations, which then makes me think of the students who those high schools are in their backyard. Now they can't test in their backyard because there are students that are pushed further out seeking testing sites because they need a score for whatever reason. I sit and think about the fact that when I do go out, I wear a mask. And as a high school student, you want to talk, you want to be social. And when you're taking the test for 4 hours, I think you might focus on my ears hurt, or I'm tired of wearing the mask, or it's hot. And so then you can't necessarily focus on taking the test while you're taking the test. Or if someone behind you is coughing, are you worried about being sick? And are you going to get sick? And now I don't want to get up or be, and yes, you're supposed to social distance. And so some of the logistics of running the sites are tough. We didn't do, like I said, the June 13th date, but I had heard from various folks that the schools who did host, because they'd been closed, the temperature in the school wasn't comfortable because the school had been closed for 2 or 3 months. And so it was stale or super hot. And then students weren't comfortable in their environment to test. We also have students I know that have reached out, and it takes a little bit of planning to get them a waiver for either ACT or SAT, so they're not paying the cost. And when we're not in the school, I can't just walk down to the office that has the waivers. I have to then email someone to then get them to check it, to then email it back to me so I can get it to the family. And so that adds steps. And when you're on the last day to register for the test, that creates an issue that now you can't sign up because we didn't connect quickly enough to then get the waiver. So, I think there's going to be, unfortunately, until we really test or more sites test, to kind of figure out some of the processes so students are comfortable. Because I know their students are already stressed when they're parking their car or getting dropped off, and they have to have an ID, and did they bring a calculator, and do they have pencils, and now they need a mask, and and it's hard enough just on a normal opportunity. And so I want to alleviate all that anyway. Some of it, until I guess we do it the first time, unfortunately, I'll be curious on what happens after July 18th when I do test. And then just because ACT and SAT have added additional dates to test, that doesn't mean at my high school I could maybe host them. And then due to social distancing, I can only have maybe 100 or 150 students when I normally would host 400. And, you know, lots of students come and test, but with everything going on right now, there's no way I can have 400 students in my building. So hopefully, yeah, Adam, does that answer
It
enough
does.
of that question?
Yeah. It really does. I think one of the things I noticed as a pre-college person and then transitioned to a student success person is there was so much energy being put into the class of 2020, the high school class of, oh, they missed their prom, oh, they missed graduation. And yeah, that was bad, but they basically had all their money in the bank, so to speak, right? They've registered for college. They've pretty much picked the school they're going to. They've done their FAFSA, all of them. But then I was thinking in the back of my mind, what would I be doing when I was an Upward Bound director? When I was working in TRIO, thinking about my 21s and thinking about my 22s, in knowing that these, you're talking about summer melt, these students have not been in school since March. And many of them have been in places that they're emotionally, physically, spiritually not safe, and that's not a priority. And then you put all of this off, and then we're having to, all of my TRIO colleagues, they're virtual this summer too, running Summer Bridge, running their summer program. And the 2021s are going to suffer. The 2022s are going to suffer because, I mean, now that you see the numbers coming out of this thing recently out of COVID, this ain't going to end anytime soon. I think one of the things I also thought about, and I'm going to put Avora's article that she referenced in the chat. One of the things that I thought about that I wanted to quickly ask Avis about was the idea, because you kind of touched on imposter syndrome, right? This idea that students are looking around, because I used to always look around and be like, do people know that my stepdad was an addict and alcoholic? Do people know that my mom worked 3 jobs and I was a latchkey kid? What are some of the struggles with imposter syndrome that you think, and you could throw it out to anybody, but Avis, if you want to start, that you think students of color in particular could have at a college or university that might be not Akron, maybe it's Cincinnati, maybe it's Ohio State, maybe it's Miami, that they got in, but they're always looking around saying, maybe I don't belong because I didn't run this score. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's the same syndrome that a lot of students are dealing with across the board. It was one of the things I had to deal with. So I take some of my personal experiences and I try to help me relate to the students and stay relevant. But one of the things, I always thought everybody in my class was smart. I didn't really try on that AP test, got a 3. Everybody else studied hard, but most got 2s. I was like, okay, so it took me years before I figured out the truth about myself. But even in college, being in those classes, you sit with your classmates, those who are used to the system, right? The students who have parents with degrees, who prepped them, who've done college since they were 16, 17, been taking classes. You see them and you feel like you know something that you don't, regardless of your score. And then when you start getting to those harder classes, those especially talk math majors, let's talk to math classes. Once you get in there, it's okay. Why am I not getting this? Or a professor that's saying, you remember this was going on. You learned this back in algebra or pre-calc or whatever, and you're like, no, I don't remember none of that. I just barely got through the class, or I got through the class and I got an A, but I thought it was fine, but I don't remember anything. So I think the syndrome, that imposter syndrome, is placed on a lot of students, especially students of color, students from low income areas or areas or first generation. I'm trying to figure this stuff out. To this day, the conversation hasn't changed with a lot of students who are first gen. Yeah, I'm trying to figure this out. Yeah, my parents didn't know much and I don't know what I'm doing. So the whole time you feel like you don't belong. You feel like everybody else has information that you didn't have. And so you feel like you're competing, that you're trying to win a game that you can't win. I think you alluded to it about the 40, right? I'm horrible running the 40, but my game speed is a whole nother story. Put me in the game, I'm gonna catch it. Put me on the line and put me against the clock, I'm not gonna win. So I think our students need that type of support coming in. It's going to be okay. And just like what you alluded to with the next class coming in, I think they will suffer from that so much, because now it's depending on the school you're coming from. You know, my child did great because they had all A's and we went to online, but did they really? The truth is, a lot of schools were just making do and getting students through this last term. And then this next year, it's going to be some of the same situation. I was able to be on some training that we're doing to get faculty ready for the fall, and they're extra excited about some of the tools that we can use. And I told my staff, I'm nervous and I'm worried about our students this fall semester because they don't know what they're going to get hit with. When professors and faculty are into it and they want to learn more, they utilize all the tools they possibly can. They're going to have students doing work back to back, and they don't know what's going to hit them. And so I think they'll be confused by how smart they are and how prepared they are, because now with the system, it's telling you that you're okay. You've switched online and everything has been fine. You do check-ins, you still do the work, but I think it's going to be even harder to compete for students moving forward, especially in the next couple of years, just because of the setback we have.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I just, it's one thing, you know, for all y'all who don't know, imposter syndrome is that voice in your head in certain spaces, and it happens with Black folks, it happens with women, it happens with a whole bunch of different types of people, Latinx folks, when you're looking around thinking you're the only one, right? And literally, at times you are the only one. And you're wondering, do I belong? Am I an imposter? I'm not supposed to be in this space. This is for those kind of people. And then you add, well, I got this test score and I'm at the University of Minnesota, right? And I wouldn't have gotten in with a 17 composite, but they let me in because I got a 3.9, right? And I just wonder if that will affect our students and the kind of work some of our practitioners who are on the university success side will have to do with them to kind of erase that voice. Because I think there was a whole bunch of talk about students having grit. I don't think poor kids need to be taught to have grit. They got grit, right? It's other kids need to be taught to have grit. You're in college, what we need to do is tell you you do belong, right? Because it doesn't matter what you ran in the 40, like Ava said, we're running the game now. Avora, I have a question for you that Carol has asked. So there's a lot of prep out there. There's a lot of high-paced prep, and you kind of alluded to it, but as a TRIO program administrator, what have you tried? What do you think is the best? What do you think are the best results in prepping your students? Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. Prior to working with Doorway to College, I worked with Cambridge. The material is good with Cambridge, but the material is not for first-gen students. Number one, it's you do it this way. We give you a book, you go through the book. I mean, I could do some sessions. I did sessions with my students, but we give them this book and they're supposed to go through it. Sorry, that's not going to work if you have a job after school, you're watching your siblings, you know, you're living with some tough home conditions. It just doesn't fly. And so I had to find something different. I like the prep sessions that we do with Doorway to College. In fact, based on the last session that we did with you, Carol, back before this whole pandemic started, the math instructor is working with the students on some math problems and getting them ready for math, because that's where our scores suffer the most. But a lot of these prep programs don't take our students into consideration. You know, they don't look at the fact that mom would rather have me work after school than be preparing for the SAT test, or the fact that I have to watch my siblings or whatever other responsibilities I have.
Yeah. So to elaborate for the group, Doorway to College is a nonprofit foundation. There's so many people as states have went to mandatory testing that have gotten in the test prep business. We like to say we're in the test prep mission. We're about partnering. We're not about selling. We're not a company. We're a foundation. And our real goal is to partner with like-minded programs and individuals, like Avora mentioned, to help her students. I used this prep back in 1999 with Doorway to College when I was an Upward Bound director in Rockford, Illinois. And I've seen hundreds of students' lives. And as I moved around the country, then being the chief student success officer at universities, I would see students come to me who, if they were to have just prepped, I could have gotten them over the finish line easier. They could have graduated with this major. They could have done better. So we would bring in Doorway to College to prep students. So what the foundation does is we provide 5-hour strategy prep. So we are not like a lawyer selling content because we're charging you by the hour. So less than $100 a kid, we provide strategy prep face-to-face, teaching students the strategy behind taking the test, how it was written by the test taker, and the results are just through the roof. Like Devorah said, between a 2 and 5 school point composite improvement on the ACT after 5 hours, and a 50 and 150 point improvement on the SAT after 5 hours. We have been doing these face-to-face because that's what works for our kids, if you know what I mean. But we also have done these virtually, just like this live, since 2013. So when everybody said they switched to online, Doorway to College, because of accessibility issues and challenge issues, we have been using online modalities to deliver this prep in a safe, reliable, consistent way for our students. We've been doing that since 2013. So just to give some folks, before we jump off and I turn it back to Allie, some background about the foundation. I know we facilitate things like this because this is part of our mission, but we're always looking to partner with more people because the one thing we can do is ensure that our students get their best score, that their altitude should not be limited by their aptitude. Their score should be their best score. So they know I did my very best. And so we're always looking to partner with people to do that. Allie?
Thank you, Adam. Thank you to my colleagues for joining me. If I could give a virtual and actual round of applause to all those joining me. Yes, snaps to all those on this call. I really appreciated this hour with you all, and I appreciate those who attended. For any of those interested in furthering conversations regarding issues in the work that we do, we're having a couple further Educators in Unison virtual forums coming up. The next one will be student athlete success in this era of COVID-19, which we'll touch a little bit on some of these issues that we talked about today. Erin specifically talked a little bit about that. And then we will also be having one in August, which we're all really excited about, creating belonging for all students in times of civil and social unrest. So that'll be something to look forward to as well. Any of those can be signed up via Zoom and via our website, which you can currently access via doorwaytocollege.org or doorwaytocollege.com. You can find us at both. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.